So, why the prince left the palace? Is there a hippie culture in India? There has been, there is still. When did it started? 60s? Really? 60s? 65? Are you remembering yourself? Who are the sort of the most prominent sort of hippie that you can think of, Indian? Okay, anyway, I'm just saying this because I think probably it's kind of relevant to talk about sort of the spirit of hippie. I don't want to say the prince who left the palace was actually like the pioneer hippie. I don't want to say that, although I don't want to also completely outright that, because if he was a hippie, he was a really, really important hippie. And by the way, Siddhartha was not the only prince who left the palace. There were a lot of others who left the rich and the power during that time. I mean, to name few, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, he was a prince also. And Shantideva, some of us know this figure. And Atisha Dipamkara, I believe. And also, I'm very bad with the history. Bodhidharma, who is responsible for the whole Zen tradition that flourished China and Korea and Japan. He was a prince, I believe, and he left also the palace. And not only palace, but we are also talking about the richness and the success. Like Amarpali, very successful courtesan who left also her status. Also, it's not only Buddhism that had this practice. Jain, I think, had countless. I think India really celebrated once upon a time, probably even a little bit even today, this kind of thinking. And the reason why they left the palace is not really, surely you know, we know that they were not like being irresponsible. In fact, the opposite. They were really looking for a very high purpose. This was driven by very high aim. And I think there's a countless purpose of aim, but if I may emphasize on something that's quite important. As a human, trust is very important. Trust. To trust is important, and to be trustable is important, and or being able to trust. I guess mainly being able to trust is very important. We are not talking about, like mundane trust, like lending money or asking someone to do plastic surgery or something like this. We are talking about much deeper and profound level of trust. Also, I think for human beings, being in control is very important. One way or another, I guess, we are all a little bit of a control freak. Being in control, and also art of controlling situation, controlling others, I guess. That's important for us, human beings. And then the next one, that's important is confidence. I think the confidence is such an important thing for human being. Having confidence in something. So these are quite an important element that really had something to do with a prince leaving the palace. If you are looking deeper into some of his teachings afterwards, for instance, when we talk about trust, what are we talking about? Trust what? Confident of what? Control what? Are we talking about trusting the environment? Are we talking about controlling the environment? Are we talking about confident with people? Are we talking about confident with a system? Are we talking about trusting our life? So it's kind of an important issue for us human beings. If I single out that something that is most important, probably the single most important thing, and the most powerful thing is mind. Now we have mind. I'm sure most of you do. I say this with a, this is reaching to an age where there's a lot of automation, and I've been told that there's robot phenomena. So it is possible that in 20 years, my audience, if I live till then, my audience will also have robots listening to me, which, by the way, as a Buddhist, we have no problem. As long as this robot has fear and hope, they are victim of Buddhism. Yes, let's come back to mind. We do have mind. And we need to think about this. Are we lucky that we have mind? We are not so sure. Is it a curse that we have a mind? Probably, sometimes. Why? Because as you can experiment now, right now, this thing called mind, it ends up knowing something. It ends up cognizing something. It ends up being aware of something. And it is painful sometimes. You understand? You know, this thing that hears, that judges. You know what I'm talking about? We just can't help. We just can't help. But we have to end up knowing, cognizing, noticing, being conscious. This is something that we have. And we can't sort of pause it for a day or two. We can't sort of we can't really stop it altogether. So we have this something so powerful called mind, and I mean, we are stuck with it. We are stuck with mind because, and also many times this mind is useful because it is this mind that is learning, that is doing the learning. But also it is this mind that is judging. I think I've said that. And also it is this mind that validates. We keep on validating things. It's this mind that is measuring things. And then, as I said, hope and fear, obviously. Now, we just can't trust our mind. It's so fickle. It's so dependent on cause and conditions. It's so dependent on environment, education. It's so dependent on all kinds of objects. Pleasurable objects, painful objects. And I'm not even talking about mind of others. I'm talking about one's own mind. We can't trust our own mind. Not even for a moment. We can't trust, we can't have confidence to this mind. It's too fickle. It's too dependent on conditions. We cannot rely on this mind. What we think, what we feel, what we will be conscious next moment, we are not sure. And also, this mind keeps on making a distinctions between, now I'm getting into something very, very Buddhist sort of realm here. This mind keeps on separating or divorcing between the appearance, the projection, realm of the projection, and the realm of the reality, the truth. The mind keeps on misunderstanding. And whether you believe it or not, everything that this mind decides or come to a conclusion is incorrect. This is what Buddha said. Everything that is decided, perceived, projected, imagined, has no base. It's an assumption. It is a sort of a very good, educated guess job most of the time. And also, distorted always by personal bias. So this is the reason why the prince left the palace, because he can't live one day more pretending to have confidence, pretending to have, pretending to be in control, when he can't control the single most important and powerful thing, that is his own mind. So they are not, these people like Atisha, Padmasambhava, they are not like dropouts. They are not like irresponsible. They were very responsible. They really wanted to, because they thought it is insane to continue with this utterly untrustable mind, even, as I said, even for a day or a minute. So they wanted to conquer this mind. They wanted to make friend with this mind. They wanted to actually be happy with this mind. They wanted to understand the potential of this mind, and they use the potential of this mind. And they were not only interested in the potential of the mind, but they were actually interested in the capacity of the mind, because they realized that most of the time we only use this very small fraction of this mind. And the very small fraction of this mind that we use it utterly, in a realm of fantasy and hallucination. So they wanted to get the bottom of this. Now, I was asking about the hippie culture. Because I wanted to say that what they have done, the leaving the palace, is something that is doable today. Everybody wants to be a leader. How many books you can buy about leadership? Everybody wants to be a good management. But instead, they are being led. They are being managed. They are being led by, if not somebody else, by conditions, by society, by system, by some sort of a value. So, no matter how many books you read about leadership, you are still a victim of a condition. Everybody wants to be successful, and to be successful, you need to really know what is the meaning of accomplishment. And to understand the meaning of accomplishment, you need to know the meaning of goal, limitation of the goal. You need to know moderation, the meaning of moderation. Also, everybody wants to be creative. But again, here, to be creative, to be creative, you need to be free from a zone. And this is where I wanted to come. And then I will let you ask the questions. We are somehow, all of us, we are stuck within a certain zone. So, just like Siddhartha have this gut to leave the palace, we need to develop the gut and the confidence and the courage to get out of a certain zone. Because the zone that we live, this comfort zone, and by the way, the comfort is only comfort because we are familiar. It's like flies. They feel comfortable with the shit. And they feel comfortable there. They probably feel very insecure if they certainly in a very clean place. Because you create this zone. So this practice of leaving the zone, sacrificing the zone, and really going beyond the zone so that we can be good leader, so that we can manage our life and others' life, so that we can be creative, so that we can be successful. So this is why I was asking whether in India we have hippie culture, because I think it's very important to be hippie inside and a yuppie outside. So with this, I'm going to ask you to ask me questions, if you have. Okay. This, maybe that one, okay.
Rinpoche, thank you so much for that. Regarding your question on the mind and the thoughts of the mind, my question is, if you want to train your mind to do something, if you want to keep a thought, but you are unable to keep that thought because your mind will eventually stray and think of 20 other things, whose thoughts are those 20 other things when you are just trying to focus on that one thought?
Oh, yours, of course. Who else? Yours, definitely. But this is because you are not controlling. You are not controlling your mind, and you are not being able to control the mind because you don't even know the mind. Most of us, not just you, I mean, all of us, me too included. We don't know the mind. We don't know the function of the mind. We don't know the sort of the nature of the mind, the character of the mind. So, in fact, not only we don't know, we don't have the courage to face this mind. I will explain this a little bit more. The reason why we are always looking for some sort of a entertainment, some sort of a distraction. Basically, entertainment is a distraction, whether it is a music, rock and roll music, or whether it is a cushion, meditation cushion. They are equally a distraction. It is some sort of a what do you call it, escape. And what we are doing is because we cannot bear to face this mind, then of course, even though we have no courage to face the mind, we do go through the pain of fear of not being in control, fear of not being able to trust, fear of not having the confidence. So then what do? We usually numb ourselves. We inject ourselves with dosage of strong, numbing devices, whether it's a food, whether it's a shopping, whether it's a, I don't know, new car or a new app, or it doesn't matter, whatever, to numb. And the numbing tools don't usually last. Because once you use several times, you will need another numbing of the new problem. Actually, it ends up become a new problem. And I forgot to mention that the reason why, I wanted to discuss about why the prince left the palace is really to talk about the notion of renunciation. I think the word renunciation, probably the English word renunciation is not doing the justice. In Tibetan we call it ngenjung, which is because in the English word renunciation, it has the connotation of leaving things behind, like leaving, retreating. In the Buddhist, the essence of the Buddhist idea of renunciation is not really that. It's actually understanding the truth. When you understand the truth, then whether you leave or not, really is up to you. So, there is a very important poet in Tibet. I forgot his name. He wrote a really beautiful poetry. I think there's a general story about when Prince Siddhartha was born. His father asked astrologer to look at the newborn prince, and the astrologer said, if he remains in the palace, he will become Chakravardin, I think the sort of the universal king, and then if he leave the palace, he will become the Buddha. But actually, especially from this great Mahayana poet and a very celebrated poet, according to him, actually to be the Tathagata is more than Chakravardin, because as a Tathagata, as the one who is awakened, has conquered much, much more than a universal king. So he has actually become the king of the kings. So the Buddhist understanding of the renunciation is really, this is why I'm emphasizing to be hippie inside and to be yuppie outside, because it's really got nothing to do with leaving your job and your family and then searching some sort of a truth outside. Okay?
Thank you. I want to ask about, so you talked about how there's limitations of society and conditions, and how almost all of us have expectations and people have expectations for us, and how we don't have control over our minds. So when we have aspirations and goals, but so when is it okay for us to go pursue what we want to do, but there's a risk of disappointing or at the expense of the expectations and conditions that we have, like that are put on us?
I think it's like this. It's a very good question. I think it's like this. as I said, you are stuck with mind. You can sort of switch it off. You can't even pause it for a moment. You understand? So whether you like it or not, you are going to assume. You are going to have hope. You are going to have a fear, so on and so forth. But if you know that that's what's going to happen, my mind is going to hope. My mind is going to have fear. My mind is going to assume. That's already, I would say, 60% of release. Because most of the time, we don't even know that. Most of the time, we have a goal and we are totally blind with the goal and the expectations, hope, fear, this are all taken not as, all these are taken as a path. You understand? So basically blindly believing that that's going to happen. You understand? So you are stuck with a mind. And as I said, many times it's a blessing. It's because you have a mind, you learn, you decipher, you get curious, you ask questions. Mind, by the way, mind is quite an amazing thing. Mind is the only thing that knows itself. It's like a lamp. Lamp illuminates the darkness, but without the lamp, lamp also illuminates itself. You know, you don't need another lamp to illuminate the lamp. Likewise, the mind is the knower of everything and also knows itself. That's the advantage we should take. But mind also destroys itself by creating a lot of entanglement. Mind creates, as that gentleman earlier said, mind creates thought. Thought comes, and when the thought comes, we get entangled. We forget that it is due to conditions, is due to, influences. We end up separating between the projection and the reality, and that's how we then begin to entangle ourselves. Entanglement, basically, experience of the entanglement is what we call samsara in the Buddhist sort of very strict sense of, according to Buddhism, entanglement, getting entangled. Do you get worked up? Do you get entangled, worked up, obsessed, engaged, and also occupied? Yes. These are what mind do. That's how the mind functions. It gets occupied, it gets entangled, it gets engrossed, it gets, distracted. And many times we do it intentionally. One of the definition of human being, the suffering of the human being, according to Buddhism, in Tibetan language is delpong. Del means busy. Human beings are always busy, and they can't do without being busy. If they are not busy, they get scared. That's why people, we don't like to meditate, and we don't want to sit alone, or we don't want to isolate ourselves. We have to communicate. We have to numb ourselves through social media, whatever. Because the naked mind is unbearable. Okay? Yeah, I guess.
Namaste, Guruji. When we were children, we had heard stories about how Siddhartha left the palace because of the 3 stories of not fear, but
suffering.
Suffering,
Yeah,
yes,
right.
and of suffering. So I wanted to know how important is fear and suffering to be on the right path A? And B, what is the role of gurus when which come in a person's life? Thank you.
Okay, there's a teaching called Four Noble Truths. And one of them is called Truth of Suffering. And tagline, so to speak, for this teaching is called Dunghal Sheparja, which means you must know suffering. So I guess knowing the suffering is important. And that's a big statement, by the way. Most of the time we don't know the suffering. Okay. In this context, let me talk about compassion a little bit, and then probably this will open our understanding of what we mean by dukkha. Because again, the English word suffering is not doing the justice. Suffering, in the most gross, most obvious suffering is the uncertainty that we all are subject to. We are just not certain. We don't know the next moment. That's the most, that's the gross, most, obvious one. Now, more subtle but more vicious. Actually, wait. Sorry. The most obvious one is the pain that we talk about, okay? Like, I don't know, headache, divorce, I don't know, war, famine, ailment, loss, separation, so on and so forth. That's the most obvious. And then the second one is the uncertainty that I was talking. But the third, this is very important. The third element of third suffering is everything is illusion. Yet we just don't know they are illusion. The fact that they have no inherently existing nature is the suffering. So you see, so this is why when we, in Buddhism, when we talk about compassion, we are not talking about having some sort of a sympathy towards some obvious beings who are going through an obvious pain or hunger or, I don't know, a war or a famine. We are talking, basically everyone who is subject to uncertainty is object of suffering. And even more than that, anything that is illusory, yet not knowing that that is an illusion, that ignorance is the suffering. So knowing this suffering is very, very important. And to tie up with your second element of the question, actually, in this context, in this level, the suffering is the guru. It was for Siddhartha, it was the suffering that triggered his curiosity. Is this it? Is this, born, breakfast, lunch, dinner, same thing next day, family? Is this all there is in this life? And then the curiosity got bigger, and then he wanted to find the truth. And then after many, many years, finally he found the truth under the Bodhi tree. And that the truth is the third or the fourth truth, which is really that everything is just your projection. And if you can understand, now this is very easy to say that everything is your projection, but very difficult to actually practically and emotionally chew this. Okay?
Dear Rinpoche, in this world, so many information about positive or negative. Any information can influence my mind. Sometimes my Western not enough or insight not strong enough. How could I find the truth mass, or which mass can should spiritual liberate?
I see.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you, thank you.
That's a very big question. I don't know whether I can answer all of completely. Well, within this context of what we have been discussing, as I said earlier, I think we need to have at least the intention and the aspiration to get out of the zone. We always are comfortable with a certain zone. The zone that we have created through our education, through our friends, family. It's not that easy to get out of the zone because this is a zone that we are familiar with, and anywhere else we don't know what lies behind this zone. So to have the bravery, to have the courage to get out of the palace, like the Siddhartha, I think initially maybe that's something that we can do. If not, physically, at least with an aspiration. And anyway, most act of the Buddha can be also understood as a symbolic and metaphorical. Okay. There's so many here. Okay. Which wants to?
Rinpoche, can you tell us how do we differ the difference between distraction and support for the mind to be achieved, such as Siddhartha that he left, that the mind made him left the palace?
How do we
differ?
differ?
Separate what is distraction and what is the support to achieve such a mind.
That's again very, very important and big questions. In Tibetan word, we have a word called Surijin Mayimba Yila Jeba. It's actually a very beautiful word. I don't know how I'll be able to translate this properly. Surijin Mayimba Yila Jeba, which is actually a description of emotion. When you experience any kind of experiences, usually we are experiencing it not nakedly. Okay, let's put it this way. We are always seeing it through a certain filter. And there's a lot of filter. And okay, so I think the core question here from Rinpoche is, we are talking about the filter. The filter are usually they are what we call it, they are temporary, loburua. They are temporary, they are not the nature, they're not even the secondary nature of the truth. They are temporary. So for instance, if you are looking at this wall through my sunglass, I will see this wall as pink, let's say. And the sunglass that I'm wearing is not part of my eyes. It's a temporary thing that I'm wearing it. And this temporary obstruction need to be pointed out. okay, this, and that's a difficult job, because many times we will not accept it, that this is, and this is why I was talking about the zone. We are so comfortable. Okay, for instance, most of us will be very comfortable if someone give you a kilo of gold. And this is a great thing, because that's how we have been told that the gold is great. We will not be that happy if we are about to, board the plane and then somebody give you like 10 bricks, because you think it's an excess and it's heavy and so on and so forth. So that is going to be not that easy, but we can, through what we call hearing and contemplation and meditation, we can influence. By the way, as much as I've been talking about how stubborn and how difficult this mind is, mind has also a lot of beauty. One of the great thing about the mind is it's manipulatable. As much as it can be manipulated in a negative way, it is easily manipulated in a positive way. And in fact, according to Maitreya, a great commentator of Buddhism, he said that the strength of positive manipulation of mind is higher than the negative. Why? Because, according to Maitreya, because mind fundamentally is good and pure. Because it's fundamentally good and pure, therefore it's easier to manipulate it in a positive way. And I think this actually makes a lot of sense. I think to be kind is much more easy than to be aggressive and to be, because to be aggressive and to be angry and to be jealous and to be, suspicious is painful. But it comes because we went through the school of jealousy, school of anger, school of desire, and then we live with the environment of anger, jealousy, pride, so on and so forth. So that's why we feel that they come easier. It's a matter of creating the right cause and condition. I hope I have answered your question. Okay. So many questions.
Thank you. I find the way you're explaining it is really wonderful and able to understand. Siddhartha had a son, and he left the palace and left his son.
Also, oh,
Could you
yes, he left. Yeah.
could you maybe explain to me how he justified that in his own mind, and more in a context today where some of us who feel very lucky and blessed with having the ability to spend our time the way we do,
Okay.
we do struggle with how much time do we spend working, getting out of our own comfort zone, spending
Right.
time for ourselves, as well as balancing kids.
Very important question. This is really important. Actually, I have been told also, Siddhartha has to be really the most irresponsible father. He left, family, the kid, the wife. I'm going to quote Ashwagosha, who was actually, I think, the first person, after Buddha himself, first person who actually told the story of the life of the Buddha. The Buddha himself taught his own life story, sort of autobiography. It's called Lalita Vistara Sutra, but it's really grand. And then after that, I think is Ashwagosha's Buddha Charita. And if you read it, it's actually translated by English long before. It's quite beautiful. It's all poetry. And by the way, Rahul, Buddha's son, also ended up leaving the palace later. So that's how the dynasty of Shakya extinct. Not only that, especially, there's so many. Ashoka, the great, he was so great. His empire was so big. And even so, his son and both his son and the daughter also become monk and the nun. And that's, I guess, the end of the Maurya, right? Maurya, because they no more. That's what I was saying. India, maybe even today a little bit, maybe more than any other nations, India has celebrated these kind of thinking for centuries. It's a bit like today, if your son or your daughter finally managed to go to one of those elite university, win a scholarship to, I don't know, do a very important research that will save the world or ecology. It's a bit like this. So for those Indians in the past, like going to the forest is really like going to elite universities to find the truth. So what I'm saying is the mental state at that time is, first of all, different. Anyway, according to Ashwagosha, this is what the Siddhartha said. And this is also actually coming from Lalita Vistara Sutra, that he said, me as a prince, and my wife Yashodhara, and my son Rahul, and my father Shuddhodana, and my aunt Prajapati, Mahaprajapati, all these, and my subject, all the Shakya, I am the next king and I need to protect them. I have to do, as a ruler, I am responsible for all these people. But if they are subject of death, old age and sickness, I can conquer any other enemies. I can fight with my, outer enemies. But this, because there's a very there's a detailed descriptions about conversation between the prince and his charioteer, Chana, almost some of the depictions are almost like prince must be so naive, like, oh, will the death come to me? Yes, your majesty, you are also subject of death, so on and so forth. So anyway, the prince thought, if I can't protect my kins and my family and my nation from these, why I deceive myself and the rest? There has to be a solution. I will find this solution. I alone will find this solution. And my father is blind. He is blind in believing that all this will last. So of course my father will obstruct my quest for this truth, but out of compassion to my father, my aunt, my child, my wife, I must get the bottom of this. And this is the reason. So this is how he justifies. Yes, from ordinary people like us, those who only think of this life, only think in terms of this zone, then yes, very irresponsible he was. Okay?
Can I speak? Is it on?
Okay.
Rinpoche, can you see me? Loud enough?
Yes.
I was wondering if you talk about forgiveness from a mind perspective. I understand forgiveness is you can look at it from the heart perspective, from compassion, from the soul perspective. Would you talk a little bit about forgiveness from the mind perspective, please?
Okay, I have to be careful here. What do you mean by forgiveness? Because this is sort of a theistic language.
I think for ordinary people on a daily basis, you deal with people and stuff and expectation and disappointment. And how do you reconcile with the Buddhist path and
I see.
forgiveness?
Okay. Well, it's a bit like this. You know, this is what I was saying earlier. I was quoting Maitreya. Remember, to be trained positively is easier, and the reason why we believe in that is because fundamentally mind is Buddha. Mind is pure. So actually, I don't know whether the word is forgiveness. It's more like knowing. It's a bit like, okay, you know this friend of that you have this friend, and you know very well this nature and the character of this friend, who's really kind and generous and all of that, but he has a temper, let's say. But you know, oh, but he's kind. You understand? It's a bit like understanding the real thing, not the appearance, not the projection. So all sentient beings, not just human beings, have this, Buddha nature or the fundamental goodness of human being. So learning to trust that and learning to bank on that, even though there's ups and downs and there's a temper and a tantrum and all kinds of, sticky situations, always bypassing all those appearances and trusting that fundamental basic goodness of human being. I think that's actually much more important than forgiveness, because forgiveness can create a little bit of a hierarchical situation. Okay? Do you want to? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Rinpoche. You mentioned being a hippie inside and a yuppie outside. I was able to connect it to one of your recent talks which you gave in Korea, where you mentioned that when you see through the illusory aspect of existence and when you realize the ultimate truth, you develop a respect for the illusory aspect and it becomes holy in some sense.
Yes.
So could you please explain this logically? I mean, how does this happen?
Logically. Can you repeat that again? Oh, what is the logic part?
Could you please explain why this happens? Because the tendency would be to say that this is illusory, therefore you dismiss it.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah.
But instead of dismissing it, you actually start valuing it and you hold it as holy.
I think, oh yeah, okay. This is good. Okay, I don't know whether it's a logic, but it's like an art. Because actually, again here, the Tibetan word for art is quite a good one, jutsal, jutsal. Ju actually means fake. It's like a juma, milam, it's fake, it's illusory. Tsal is like a display. So basically, art is something like a fake, it's pretense, it's created, it's fabricated. But this is so Buddhist, by the way. And I guess, you can also say Taoism in China, they talk a little bit like this. To really experience the truth, using these pathetic tools that we have. And we have really, really pathetic, worn out, overly used, overly diluted, it's like totally outdated tool. Eyes, ear, tongue, you understand this sixth sense or the five sense. It's really bad. And trying to understand the truth with this tool, we know we are not going to go that far. Right? Because language is so vague. It's just not good enough. So what do we do now? We fake it. We use fake things to express the truth. This is what art does. And you're an artist. You know this more than anyone else. We do these things. We tell lies so that the truth can be understood. Actually, probably the Buddhists, if they are Buddhist here, they may feel a little bit strange. I will just have to confidently say the whole Buddhist teachings are lies, so that you can understand the truth. I mean, okay, pick one. Buddhists say, okay, you have to meditate, so sit straight, as if spine has so much to do with enlightenment. What happens to those people who don't have good spine? You understand? So you can tell, if you look at the Buddhist tools, you can tell it's all stories. You can just tell. Sit. Oh my God, that's the worst thing you can hear. First of all, it's not a nice thing to hear, especially these days. As if standing is a sacrilegious. But that's what we have to do. And you are talking about the hippie and the deep, what? Hippie and the yuppie, yeah. There's another element in this one. To understand the truth, the actual truth, you have to be a little bit outrageous. And when I'm talking about outrageous, I'm talking about going out of zone. When you go out of zone, then you have to be out. You are being outrageous. But being outrageous can be very risky and very dangerous. So there you have to be elegant. You have to be elegant so that you will not disturb the environment. You have to walk like a cat, among the, I don't know, dishes, porcelains, you have to be elegant. So to be hippie inside and to be yuppie outside is also to unite outrageousness and elegance. Very important. These are the the Buddhist wisdom. Otherwise, it's very evident. Sometimes, okay, this is maybe a very personal feeling. Sometimes I walk into like elevator, and then there's a boy or a girl, Prada shoes. I don't even know the names. Louis Vuitton bag. You understand? All the sorts of like designers, this, that. But there's no outrageousness. So they look miserable. They look like a walking shopping mall, you understand? They look not confident, they're not at ease. So then they don't look beautiful, they're not charming. You just want to get out of this elevator as soon as the door opens. But sometimes you see this young, hip looking, with just a white t-shirt, a jeans, probably, but they're very at ease. Okay. We got carried away a little bit. We will come back to the subject. Okay.
Rinpoche, if the basic nature of mind has goodness, then why is it that bodhicitta is given as a separate practice in conjunction with seeing emptiness directly?
The great Longchenpa said, if you lost your cow, you have to look at the footprint. You have to use the footprints of the cow, even though the footprint of the cow remotely doesn't look like even cow. You understand? The bodhicitta is the footprint of your basic goodness of human being, especially the relative bodhicitta, even though it is the most fake one. We just talk. It's a very similar. I think it's really important to appreciate, these sort of. I think we sometimes get too entangled with what's the real thing, the ultimate, the real thing. I want the real thing. I had enough of the, not real thing. I think we get deceived. These unreal things that is that's surrounding us everywhere, and that's just everywhere. They're very important, so important.
Rinpoche, I'm sorry to ask a more sort of mundane question, but I'm very tempted, given we're sitting right in the midst of where a lot of the political life of India takes place.
Okay.
I often have struggled to sort of find my identity as an Indian. And within that struggle, there is quite a lot of confusion as to where all of our wisdom traditions sit. And further within that, there's a struggle to understand the Buddha and his life in relation to our various religions, and even in relation to some of the things that we hear that, oh, he's an avatar of Vishnu, and so on and so forth. I would love to hear from you, Rinpoche, little bit of, to get some better perspective on that.
You have asked to a wrong person this one, because first of all, as I've said like few nights ago, I just can't understand. I just can't fathom why the Indians have forgotten this man called Buddha, because he's the only one you have, actually. All the rest, Vishnu, Brahma, they're gods. They're not human beings, so they can't. They're not Indian. And Buddha. Yeah, I understand. Sometimes people bundle up Buddha with Hinduism and all of that, which also puzzles me, because, soon after Buddha's teaching started, after Ashoka and the Guptas and all that, Buddhism was immediately embraced by some of the greatest nations on this earth: China, Korea, Japan. Tibet. Tibetans spent 90% of the national budget translating the words of the Buddha and importing the Buddhism to, In fact, I have a sympathy towards some of the Tibetan youth people who say that Buddhism ruined Tibet. There's a little truth in it, by the way. Because of this Buddhism, peace, harmony, non-violence, so there's no defense system, and there's all renunciation, blah, 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 so there's no economy system, and, this is we are spiritual, we don't want to be, sort of, interfered by those who don't believe in the right view, so there's no foreign affairs, so on and so forth. And I have to say, Buddhism has never been good for, it's not compatible with politics. It is not. Just like probably Jainism. You can't. You just can't. First, historically, why Prince left the palace? If you're a politician, you stay in the palace. You don't go out. And then how do you use things like shunyata with a political world? It's not going to make any sense. Because in Buddhism, the wisdom of shunyata surpasses everything. When the religion have to play a little bit of a political role, religion has to emphasize on morality and ethic. Buddhists don't. It is very important to emphasize this. Many people think, oh, Buddhists are very, ethical. Yes, some of the Buddhists are ethical, but ethic and morality is not the most important. Wisdom is the most important. Yet, Buddhism is like Buddhism, the view and its path is like it's so accommodating. It's so Indian, actually. It's so Indian. The non-duality is it's made for the Indians. Well, of course, it came from from this from this part of the world. So it's okay. It's a bit like this. All the chaos are accepted. There are a lot of Buddhists who eat meat. There are a lot of Buddhists who drink alcohol. Not only that, even in the Buddhist sort of icon, there are great beings. And when we say great beings, great masters, the Buddhist sort of, model human beings, they vary. Some of them are very serene looking monks, if that's what you are looking for. And some of them are very rich and oily people like Vimalakirti, who's, and then some of them are really disgusting, like Telopa, and all of them we equally revere. And this says a lot. This says that, all this are fine, as long as you are understanding the truth. I forgot your question in the midst of all this, but did I answer some of this? What was your question? Did you forget? Yes. Right. So yes, as I was saying, I am myself. I have started to teach the Indian audience. I should tell you this. I've started to teach the Indian audience like maybe 15 years ago. And I have to admit, when I was first teaching Indian audience, I used to get so nervous. Okay, here I'm teaching the Indian. I'm teaching to the Indians those who where what I'm teaching came from. So I have to be really thinking about, I can teach like Westerners, whatever, anything. I can just pick up something and then they will all be okay. But with the Indians, I have to be careful here. This is what I used to think. I have to say, I'm sorry, but it's not like that anymore. I have to say, because then I begin to hear, Indians are learning Buddhism from, some, I don't know, groups or teachers or books. And when you read those, they're just really, really, really watered down. I mean, you guys should not be learning Buddhism from Tibetan. I mean, Tibetans should be learning from the Indians, but this has not been the case. So But there is a reason, as I said, Buddhism is, because Buddhism is not really anything to do with a politic and also social thing, so I guess the interest is not there. Like, would be probably, okay, this is what I said, you asked a wrong person, because I'm not really a good Buddhist as a follower of the Buddha. I'm a more like a patriot Buddhist. So I sometimes feel like creating a Buddhist Christmas, sort of business or Buddhist marriage ceremony, Buddhist divorce ceremony. That's more likely, actually. Then you can, put in the Buddhist teachings in it. But it has never been like that. The Buddhism has never been like that. And that's going to be difficult. Okay?
So I really enjoyed the way you spoke about the mind. And now the thing is that so far we don't know how the mind works. And from what I've been reading since 2006, specifically, in the next 12, 15 years is the first time that we'll actually understand how the brain actually works.
Okay.
And you're now seeing cases of someone changing the brain or, doing, it hasn't been possible so far. And like you mentioned, colors and things like that. That's the way even I like to explain it to friends when I'm talking. One of the ultimate on this path, what at the end, what I figured is what will not change is what I want to do. If I want to become the president of America, today it's possible. A chaiwala became a prime minister, and even today, if one wants, and hopefully even with knowledge, if one wants, you can get it. And then the other interesting thing is that once we communicate, I noticed when you walked in, the two Rinpoches, you touched your heads. It's interesting. Because in the future, two brains, so all your knowledge, which I feel very sad in 2017, we are very lazy, human beings. I'm a very, very lazy person. We cannot share the information. Language, as you said, is useless. It's a very bad way of communication. But I think what's going to come is when the brains actually connect, and that pure information that you're talking about, that's been very few people have had the chance to experience that. I think that's going to be more available. And it's only 10, 15, 20 years away. And I really appreciate that you mentioned this. And that's why I keep putting my hand up to. Thank you for
basically, you want more magic. Me too. No, I'm serious. Because there's too much mathematics. There's too much practicality. And there again, to tie up with your question, India is the source of magic. You are losing this. You have to recharge. And where does the magic come from? Doing things that is senseless things, useless things. That's where the magic comes from. I mean, senseless and useless from the business-minded people's point of view. Senseless and useless from the mundane, consumer society's point of view. Sitting straight for 5 minutes is really big waste of time from Wall Street's point of view. You could be making millions. So I think, not to lose this magic of doing things that are that are, I don't know, I find it very magical, but yeah, useless things. Okay?
Rinpoche, you did say that Buddhism and politics cannot get along together, and wisdom transcends ethics and morality.
They don't go together, except when you and I and Suresh meet. Okay.
So should not Buddhism also transcend nationalism? Why do we keep emphasizing Indian identity, Indian tradition, Buddha was an Indian, unless I can only think of one justification for that, which comes from homeopathy, which is like cures like. So the poison of nationalism is used by you to tell us about the Buddha, so we accept the Buddha and then reject nationalism. Is that true? Has nationalism anything to do if we all have Buddha nature? Why do we say Indian Buddhist and Japanese Buddhist? We all have Buddha nature. So why emphasize the national identity unless it is a skillful means? Unless it is a skillful means.
I have answer to this.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Please promise that you won't tell this outside of this wall. I was just in Nepal. Just 2 days ago. And I was addressing Nepalese. And I did the same thing. But that time I didn't use the word India. I only used the word Nepal. This is me being political here. Because, remember I said, I'm not a good follower of the Buddha. Because as a follower of the Buddha, I mean, Rinpoche will confirm this. We never pray that may all become Buddhist. We never. We only pray that may all become Buddha, enlightened being. But me, somehow down there, I said, I wish people they are more Buddhist. I have to admit this. So to do that, I will say this. In Nepal, I changed the, just the word, the, nationality. And what? I don't know whether it's skillful, but you have to begin somewhere. And I think the most important, effective way to begin is playing with people's emotion, isn't it? And that there is plenty. So when I was in Korea, I was talking about how the West is basically bullying the East. And therefore, they should bring the Eastern wisdom, such as Buddhism, such as Taoism, such as, Confucianism. Because that has so much value. For instance, just like India have forgotten Buddha, Chinese have not done good job with the Taoism too. I mean, the Taoism is a wonderful Taoist appreciation of chaos. I mean, the chaos. Taoist appreciation of chaos and Taoist suspicion towards order. That is just a wonderful piece of wisdom here. But it all got sort of hijacked by the Confucius sort of practicality. So they ended up loving the order more and being suspicious with the chaos. But, it's actually quite important. Yeah, maybe just one last question. Yeah, okay.
Hi. I'm really glad you touched upon this idea of Japanese Buddhists and Indian Buddhists and so on. Because as the youth of India, we don't really get any access to Buddhism. So we rely on organizations that kind of have some sort of interpretation of Buddhism. And one such organization, which is quite far and prevalent, is the Soka Gakkai. and they focus a lot on the Lotus Sutra and things, and there's always a lot of benefit, and I don't know whether it's games of the mind, but there's a lot of benefit, and there's a lot of people who strongly believe in it. And I mean, I've been part of the organization for a bit as well, but from time to time I do question it, because I don't have any real connection to the to Shakyamuni Buddha. I have connection to the Japanese philosophers and their interpretation, and then the Japanese monk and his interpretation of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. So what are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on chanting Namyo Rengekyo and how people do it on, endlessly? They make these endless hour goals in order to meet their life goals. And a lot of times, the 21st century way of thinking of things doesn't quite, make sense with it. But a lot of times it works still. So what are your thoughts?
Well, again, from me, I close one eye. Although there has been some controversy regarding some of these specific, because, I think it is always, it's like this, as I was saying earlier, Buddhism really, even if you look at the icon of Buddhism, it's really, the variety is amazing. We respect the serene look, we respect the dirty look, we respect the rich look. This is the wealth of Buddhism, the wisdom, the wisdom. That should not be deprived, that should not be lost. Any of these group or teachings, or they can, if they are like a stepping stone, if they are like, if they act as one that triggers you to find more deeper and more profound level of teachings, I think I have no problem. But if you are staying there and if you think that this is it, this is the final, then we have a problem, because then, it's a bit like going to a temple and, satisfying with just the door, because you should really go inside and explore. So, and especially in India, to be satisfied, and to be satisfied with just that element. And actually, I should say, even with the Tibetan Buddhism, I have to admit, the Tibetan Buddhists will say the word, this is it, this is the final, this is the right interpretation. But probably, in defense to the Tibetan way of thinking, we will have to say thanks to the past patron of Tibetan Buddhism, as I said, so much emphasis. I mean, several generations of the Tibetan kings have put everything for Buddhism. So due to that, I have to say there is a strong tradition of study and practice of Buddhism, which is, but having said that, I think it's not so good to limit yourself just to that. Otherwise, as you said, you end up losing the big picture. Okay.